Warm desert winds whispered across the red sandstone cliffs as dusk fell over the Navajo reservation. Long shadows stretched over the land, coloring it in deep crimson and purple. Bidziel crouched near a clearing, his fingers sifting through the earth. He glanced up at the fading sun, feeling its final glimmer heat the back of his neck. Tonight, he would need the twilight silence for his work. Bidziel was known among his people for his dedication to ancient ways, but also for the secret ability he carried in his blood. A power to shift his form and harness the arcane energies of sand painting to confront nightmares. In his youth, he had discovered that certain paintings on the ground, composed meticulously of colored sand, powdered stones, and pigments from desert plants, could be used not only for ceremony, but also to trap and seal away malevolent spiritual entities. He had learned this through dreamlike conversations with the medicine men who came before him, voices echoing through the hush of midnight after each clandestine ritual. But that was long ago, and of late the nightmares plaguing the region had only grown stronger. Though most families followed time-honored ceremonies for healing, something unique was needed now. People complained of terrifying visions, dark shapes clawing through their dreams, monstrous silhouettes looming under the moonlight. Even the sheep had begun showing signs of distress, scattering in fright when night descended. Children woke screaming, older folks refused to venture beyond the glow of their porch lights. The entire community felt it. A wave of dread rolled in each evening, as if the boundaries between nightmares and reality had thinned. Bidziel had already spent days in preparation. He had gathered plants for pigments and carefully chipped bits of turquoise and red sandstone for color. His grandmother, one of the last keepers of the old stories, had passed on the knowledge of weaving protective layers into a sand painting. He remembered her voice as she told him, "Where the night way meets the day way, stand guard. The shapes you create must be precise." Since her passing, those lessons lingered in his mind, guiding him. In a clearing near a half-dead pigeon tree, Bidziel began his work. First, he asked the desert for permission with a soft, lilting prayer under his breath. He set out the pigments in small buckskin pouches, brown from the local earth, blue from ground turquoise, yellow from desert flowers, red from the sandstone. In the center, he spread a fine white sand that would serve as the base. Drawing faint lines with his fingertip, he visualized the pattern. A circular design representing the protective boundary, animals that guarded the four directions, and swirling shapes meant to lure nightmares into the center. He tugged gently at his shape-shifting ability. His vision sharpened, hearing heightened. He could sense the swirl of energies melding with the desert's hush. The nearly invisible threads of another realm brushed against him, just beyond the range of normal human perception. Methodically, he worked each color into the design, red swirls dotted with gold, merging into arcs of turquoise that circled back toward the middle. With every grain of sand placed, an incantation formed in the back of his mind. The wise medicine men in his dreams had instructed him that the arrangement represented not just art, but a spiritual net, a labyrinth for nightmares. Soon the air began to hum with a low rhythmic tension. When dusk gave way to night, the painting stood completed. Bathed in starlight, it emitted a muted glow that only Bidziel's enhanced sight could glimpse, like tiny embers flickering in the sand. He knelt at the painting's edges and breathed a quiet prayer of invitation. He knew that to seal nightmares, he must first coax them into a form. They rarely cooperated, preferring to haunt minds, so he had to shift into something that could lure them out. He removed his moccasins and, with bare feet, stepped carefully around the painting. His nail beds tingled, and a sudden wave of heat coursed through him. Shape-shifting required focus. He'd attempt a coyote form this time. Swift, cunning, a natural traveler of night. For a moment, the transformation wavered. The lines of his body rippled. Bones whispered. Then his limbs folded inward, chest broadening, muzzle extending. He shook out the dust. Where a man once knelt, a coyote stood, fur the color of a moonlit desert. With a low growl, the coyote sniffed at the edges of the painting. Through the heightened sense of smell, Bidziel detected a bitter tang, residual fear, nightmares waiting to be called forth. He lifted his muzzle to the sky and let out a series of yips, calls pitched to attract the attention of those lingering night spirits. This call was not only Coyote's cry, but also the echo of ritual, a beckoning for the nightmares to reveal themselves. The wind died, and for a heart-pounding moment, the desert hung in perfect stillness. Then, shapes started moving along the periphery, faint wisps at first. Flickers of black against black. The nightmares had heard the call. Energy crackled, swallowing the ground in an unnatural hush. Bidziel stilled himself, every sense on edge. The nightmares hesitated, uncertain whether to take the bait. Through parted lips, the coyote tongue quivered, ready to lure them closer. And they came. Swaths of formless darkness crept closer, converging on the sand, painting like hungry shadows. One by one, swirling silhouettes hovered over the design, pulled in by the arrangement's gravitational lure. Bidziel circled slowly, coaxing them forward with low growls and high yips. Closer, closer. In the center of the painting, the circular design pulsed with a faint, otherworldly radiance. No sooner had the silhouettes drifted onto the central white sand than the painting erupted in a spiral of color. The grains shimmered, each carrying a fraction of the protective incantation. The nightmares struggled to break free, but they were ensnared, caught in the labyrinth drawn precisely for this purpose. The coyote bared its teeth in satisfaction. Just as the final wave of nightmares funneled into the swirling trap, a stray tendril darted toward Bidziel. It slithered around his forepaw, sending a chill up his leg. He sprang back, his coyote form contorting. The nightmare's energy seared him with images of anguish and fear. He howled, half in coyote yowl, half in a man's cry. Summoning his will, he forcibly brushed off the dark tendril, letting it be pulled into the circle amid the others. With a loud crack, the sand painting glowed fiercely. The nightmares settled into the labyrinth, swirling in a maelstrom of color. A final, brilliant flash, and the sand collapsed into small piles, forging a dull top layer that looked harmless to the untrained eye. The ritual was complete. The nightmares were sealed for the moment. Yet, as Bidziel shifted back to his human form with a grunt of exertion, he sensed a flaw. The painting quivered, as if some bit of the malevolent force still had not settled. Exhaustion weighed on him, and he felt an unsettling certainty. While most nightmares were contained, one had evaded capture, or partially escaped at least. He clenched his jaw. The people were safe for tonight, but he must track this final shard before it wreaked havoc. He gathered his pigments and left the painting as it was, a sealed container of swirling nightmares. Vanishing into his old truck, he headed to the nearest cluster of hogans, determined to warn anyone who might be troubled by new apparitions. He passed saltbush, glimmering in the headlights, and the wind carried the faint screech of an owl. In Navajo belief, owls were harbingers of warning or death. Bidziel pressed his lips in a silent thanks to the bird, acknowledging the significance. He had to remain vigilant. Early the next morning, he visited with Kachina Begay, one of the elders known for her intuitive dreams. A wise woman with deeply wrinkled skin and metal bracelets jingling on her wrists, she offered him a seat near her wood stove. As bitter cedar smoke wreathed around them, she recounted a vision from the previous night. I felt the darkness lift, mostly. My dream was calm and still. But then a thorn-like shape burst through the calm. It used a coyote's cry, twisting it into something sinister. I woke with my heart pounding. Bidziel lowered his gaze, troubled by her words. That stray shard of nightmare must have latched onto his coyote call. He explained the partial success of his ritual. Kachina nodded slowly. You must find that piece and seal it properly, otherwise it grows stronger. Shadows gain strength when left unchecked. Moving on, he spoke to other families. Most reported relief, deeper rest, and sense of ease. Yet a few admitted that their nights were disturbed by fleeting nightmares with the sound of a coyote in them. Within days, these reports escalated. People began glimpsing a spectral coyote at the edges of their vision, its eyes gleaming in an otherworldly glow. Bidziel realized what had happened. The escaped fragment had borrowed the shape of a coyote, a reflection of his own shape-shifting spirit. It was now haunting the reservation, feeding on fear. He would need another approach. A more potent sand painting that specifically targeted this wraith coyote. Once pinned, he could incorporate it into the sealed labyrinth along with the rest. After a restless night, he made preparations for a second painting. He chose an area near a canyon stream, where water's presence could offer additional cleansing power. He assembled his pigments again, but this time added a pinch of ash from juniper and a glimmer of heated black obsidian for intensity. This new design would be more elaborate, an 8-point pattern centered on a swirl of turquoise and obsidian dust, ringed by depictions of coyote, eagle, serpent, and bear. Presentations of watchers in the 4 cardinal directions, plus the guardians above and below. By midday, he had laid out the base. The crucial moment for completion would arrive at dawn. As night fell, he decided to track the wraith coyote with a mixture of apprehension and determination. He walked into the desert. When he was far from any city lights, the sky opened up into an expanse of stars unmatched anywhere else. He waited for the hush to settle, then crouched and again allowed the magic to well up inside him. The shapeshift was quicker this time. His arms lengthened into forelegs, chest broadening, fur sprouting from his skin. In a surge of otherworldly energy, he became the coyote once more. He sent out a careful call, different from the invitation he'd made before. This time, he let out a quiet, questioning yip, inviting the shadowy double to respond. His ears perked, scanning the desert's hush. For a moment, nothing, then a distant answering cry, faint and low. On silent pause, Bidziel moved toward the sound, weaving through mesquite and juniper shrubs at the edge of a shallow arroyo. He saw it. The wraith coyote stood, bathed in faint moonlight, a pure black silhouette whose eyes shone with a malevolent crimson glow. A swirl of negative energy radiated from it, making the air ripple. Bidziel felt his fur bristle. The creature stared back, baring fangs in silent challenge. For a moment, they locked gazes. The wraith coyote advanced a few steps, its body flickering at the edges like a half-formed phantom. With a sudden burst of speed, it raced off across the desert, as though beckoning him to chase. Bidziel hesitated briefly, debating the danger, but he knew he had to track it, discover if the wraith might be lured to the new painting site by dawn. He plunged forward, heart pounding, legs pumping beneath him. The chase zigzagged across dark stretches of land, weaving near stone outcroppings and stands of juniper. Every time he edged close, the wraith coyote slipped just beyond reach, as though mocking him. Hours stretched on in a blur of starlit desert. A creeping exhaustion tugged at Bidziel's limbs, but he pressed on, each stride accompanied by a vow he would see this through. When the faintest hint of dawn's light kissed the eastern horizon, the wraith coyote abruptly changed course, heading straight for the canyon stream. Hope surged within Bidziel. The new sand painting site lay just beyond that bend in the canyon. He could sense the spiritual resonance of the half-completed design waiting there. Perhaps the wraith felt the pull, unaware it was moving toward its own trap. They reached the stream as dawn began to spill gold across the sky. The new painting lay a short distance from the water's edge. Mindful of his steps, Bidziel returned to his human form and stood at the boundary of the painting, arms outstretched as if in supplication to the rising sun. The final piece remained, pouring the sand across the center to create a gateway that would snare the wraith. The wraith coyote circled warily, eyes fixed on the swirling lines of colors. In the gentle morning light, the painting shimmered in layers of red, yellow, white, blue, and black. The obsidian dust glinted like tiny flecks of starlight. Each piece had been placed with devotion, a tapestry of spiritual might. Despite its wariness, the wraith coyote seemed drawn in by the interplay of hues. Bidzil felt a trembling beneath his feet. He had little time to complete the design. Eager to seize his chance, he snatched up a pouch of white sand mixed with turquoise shards. With a practiced hand, he poured the mixture into a spiral shape at the heart of the painting. He chanted softly, voice barely above the stream's murmurs, weaving together the words that gave the painting its final binding power. The chant invoked blessings, guardians, and protective spirits, calling them to witness the sealing of nightmares into the sand. The wraith coyote snarled, suspicious, but the chant's magnetism tugged at it. Each swirl of the funneling design pulled the dark entity closer to the center. Soon, the spirit resisted with violent convulsions, glaring at Bidzil as though to question how the coyote shifter could dare mirror its own shape. Bidzil stepped back, giving the design its full domain. At last, the wraith could no longer resist. Dark energy swirled, shaping a vortex at the painting's heart. A savage yowl tore from the wraith coyote as it was dragged into the swirling pigments. The sands glowed fiercely, forming a luminous barrier around the ghostly form. With a blazing flash, the darkness collapsed into the painting, leaving only a faint ripple over the patterns of colored sand. Bidzil exhaled a trembling sigh. The painting had done its work, but the ceiling was not yet complete. These nightmares had to be banished, or they'd seep into the earth. With the dawn sun fully risen, he began a new invocation. He crouched at the painting's edge, pressed both palms to the ground, and murmured words of finality. The shapes in the sand shifted as though alive. Colors spun inward. He envisioned the labyrinth from his first painting merging with this new one, forging an unbreakable prison for the nightmares. For an instant, he glimpsed the swirl of formless shapes, the nightmares coiling like serpents behind glass. They hissed. Then, with a final whispered syllable, the surface stilled. All was silent. Exhaustion overcame him. Across his shoulders, fatigue gathered like heavy water, and he sank to his knees. But a quiet joy also filled his chest, for the desert felt calmer, the edges of reality more solid. The seal was made. Slowly, carefully, he gathered the leftover pigments and approached the stream. There he washed his hands, letting the turbulent water carry away any lingering residue of nightmare. He prayed that it would harm no creature downstream, trusting it would be diluted into nothingness. As the sun climbed higher, Bidzil returned to his truck and made his way back home. He sensed relief in the land, livestock grazing serenely, children playing near the hoggans without fear. The wind felt like it carried an easier tune, no longer laced with dread. Multiple neighbors waved with new brightness in their eyes. Wordlessly, he understood they had slept in peace. Over the next few days, news spread of the quill in bad dreams. Families said their children once again slept soundly. The nurse at the clinic reported fewer cases of anxiety at night. Even local dogs barked less frantically after sunset. Through discreet conversations, he learned that folks only had fleeting memories of a coyote call in the distance, but none woke in terror anymore. The nightmares were safely locked within his sacred art on the canyon floor. Nonetheless, Bidzil understood that no magic was eternal if left untended. Sand paintings stood as ephemeral guardians. Wandering animals and windstorms could shift the grains, break the pattern. In traditional ceremonies, once the healing was complete, the painting was ceremonially dismantled to prevent any harmful forces from remaining in the sand. His usage of these paintings veered from norm. He had repurposed them to contain nightmares for a longer duration. He would need to maintain them, or else provide a safe, permanent resting place. He resolved to bury them in a place that could protect the land from ever re-releasing those nightmares. Deep in the desert, a network of caves honeycombed the base of a towering mesa. He had once used those caves to lodge similar dark forces. Early one morning, he set off, carefully transferring the sealed sands into earthen pots lined with protective symbols. By the time he reached the mesa, the day was at its hottest, sweat trickling down his brow. He entered the darkness, feeling the subtle shift of air against his skin, hearing the quiet drip of water from hidden cracks. Within one of the deeper chambers, he found a shallow pit scattered with shards of old turquoise he had used years ago. The place hummed with contained power, an ancient hush that had grown thick as dust over the centuries. This was the perfect site. Gently, he arranged the pots, spoke a protective prayer in a low, measured tone, then covered them with earth. He left offerings of cornmeal and tobacco, an homage to the spirits who dwelled in the dark corners of that cave. At last, he emerged from the depths and into the brilliant light of day. With the nightmares laid to rest, life on the reservation settled into a more peaceful rhythm. Children laughed freely after dark. Elders dozed contentedly on porches, and the nights felt alive, only with natural desert sounds. Bidzil carried on with everyday life, tending to his tasks, assisting with minor ceremonies, weaving stories for younger generations so they might remember the old ways. He met strangers who passed through, carrying news and trade, and quietly watched them leave, content that few knew about the hidden powers beneath the desert floor. But from time to time, the old shape-changer would climb into his truck and drive to the canyon's stream. He would walk the perimeter of the second sand painting's remains, checking for signs of disturbance. Desert storms sometimes washed the colors in rivulets, but the fundamental lines remained intact, the labyrinthic designs still strong beneath the silt. Tending to it was like caring for a living thing, ensuring the structure was not undone by weather or animal. He took note of every scuff, adding fresh pigments if necessary, and muttering incantations to keep the barrier intact. On other trips, he'd traveled to the place of the first painting, near the scrubby Pinon. Time had eroded it some, but the nightmares contained within now rested alongside the others within the earthen pots at the Mesa Cave. So he let that painting fade back into the earth, scattering cornmeal to conclude the ceremony. Each visit made him reflect on his own gift and the responsibility it entailed. Shape-shifting set him apart from most, granting him extraordinary connection to the spirits in the land. But it also meant he must face harrowing challenges that tested body and soul. He felt the press of ancestors' hands guiding him whenever he knelt in the sand to create. He heard their fervent whispers in the coyote's cry, urging him to be mindful of balance. A month passed with no further nightmares reported. Dawn after dawn, the desert glowed with the promise of safety, and by night, the hush was gentle and unthreatening. Families said their prayers with renewed hope. The old stories told by elders were no longer loaded with fear, but with carefree wonder at the mysteries that shaped their identity. And Bidzil felt a calm contentment. His role demanded secrecy, for weaving nightmares into sand was no ordinary ceremony, yet he found solace knowing that, quietly, he had struck a bargain with the night for the good of his people. Occasionally, though, he remembered the wraith coyote's eyes, that crimson glow brimming with malevolence. He sometimes wondered if his reflection in that creature was a warning that darkness comes easiest where there is a void in one's own heart. Each shapeshift was an act of bridging realms, and bridging realms always courted danger. He would forever need to tread carefully between the lines of this world and the next. Still, he trusted his grandmother's teachings. In every shadow lies a lesson about the brilliance of light. One evening, when the desert breezes carried a warm hush around him, he took a walk to the edge of a small knoll overlooking the reservation. He gazed upon the cluster of lights below, each soft glow representing a home, a family, a life without trembling nightmares. He felt an old weariness in his bones, and yet a quiet thrill too. This was his life's purpose, shaped by the gifts and burdens of his lineage. He knelt in the sand. Slowly, he traced his fingertip in a simple pattern, A circle, a swirl, a line for the horizon. In the half-darkness, he recognized that the act of creation was woven into his being, just as shape-shifting was. The knowledge would pass on one day to those who might discover their own gifts and find the courage to protect the people. Until then, he would stand watch with sand-painting sorcery, the practice of capturing nightmares in art, ensuring that when the night came, it belonged to peaceful rest and the murmur of desert wind through the sage, rather than the terror of unreined evil. In the distance, a single coyote yipped, likely an ordinary desert canine roaming the arroyos. The sound was neither menacing nor foreboding, just another voice in the nocturnal chorus. Bidzil smiled softly and let the desert's lullaby fill his ears, pledging to answer the call, to protect, guide, and keep the nightmares at bay, so his people could dream in peace.